What if I told you that one drone strike just turned off Iran's eyes and ears in the most important waterway on the planet? And what if I told you that the same night, Iran fired back at 3 different countries and missed every single time? Before we go any further, if you want to understand what's really happening in the Middle East right now, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who needs to see the full picture. This story is moving fast, and you don't want to miss what comes next. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand how big this moment is, you need to understand what led up to it. A few days ago, an American Apache helicopter went down into the Persian Gulf. At first, it looked like it could have been a technical failure. Helicopters do go down sometimes because of mechanical problems. That's just the reality of operating complex machines in harsh environments. But now we know that's not what happened. 2 separate sources with direct knowledge of the situation have confirmed that an Iranian Shahed drone, the same kind of cheap, deadly weapon Iran has been sending into conflict zones for years, struck that Apache helicopter. 2 American soldiers ended up in the water. They were rescued, thankfully, by an unmanned robotic boat. That alone is historic. It's the first time in American military history that a rescue like that has been carried out by a robot, not a human crew. But let's not get distracted by the technology for a second. Focus on what actually happened. Iran's military made a decision. They fired a weapon. That weapon hit an American aircraft. And 2 American service members ended up fighting for their lives in one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth. Iran, of course, denies this. Their official story is that the helicopter just fell out of the sky on its own. No explanation, no drone, just bad luck. Does that sound believable to you? Here's the thing about Iran's denials. They follow a pattern. Every single time something happens that Iran didn't plan to publicly take credit for, the story is always the same. It wasn't us. It was a malfunction. It was an accident. It was anything except what their own weapons actually did. But weapons don't lie. And neither does radar data, flight paths, or wreckage analysis. The investigation into this incident will eventually reveal the technical details, exactly how the drone and the helicopter ended up in the same airspace at the same time. But the bigger picture is already clear. Iran's military took an action, and that action put American lives at risk. So what did America do in response? This is where things get interesting. Because the response wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic explosions all over Iranian cities. It was something far more precise and, honestly, far more dangerous for Iran's long-term position. American fighter jets, both Air Force and Navy, flew deep into airspace near the Strait of Hormuz. And they didn't go after random targets. They went after something very specific. Iran's air defense systems, the radar stations, the ground control centers, the surveillance networks that let Iran's military see what's happening across that critical stretch of water. Think of it like this. Imagine you're trying to protect your house, but someone sneaks in overnight and disables every camera, every motion sensor, every alarm system you have. You wake up the next morning and suddenly you're blind. You don't know who's coming. You don't know who's already been inside. You don't know what's about to happen next. That's essentially what just happened to Iran's military in that region. These radar sites weren't just random pieces of equipment. They were the nerve center for Iran's entire operation in the Strait of Hormuz. They're the systems that told Iran's fast attack boats where commercial ships were. They're the systems that helped Iran track which vessels were approaching, which ones to harass, and how to coordinate swarms of small boats against bigger targets. In one night, multiple of these key locations went dark. The American military confirmed this publicly. They stated clearly that these were self-defense strikes, carried out under direct orders, in direct response to the attack on that Apache helicopter. The message was simple. You hit us, we're going to take away your ability to see. And Iran's response to losing its eyes and ears? They tried to retaliate. And this is where the story gets almost hard to believe. Iran fired missiles toward an airbase in Jordan, a base that has hosted American fighter jets. They fired more missiles toward Kuwait. They claimed they shot down an American surveillance drone, so how did that go for them? Every single missile aimed at that base in Jordan was intercepted. Every missile aimed at Kuwait was intercepted. Bahrain also intercepted incoming missiles. There was a flash near American facilities in Bahrain, but when intelligence analysts looked at it closely, they determined it came nowhere near anything important. In other words, Iran's entire retaliation, the missiles they had specifically prepared and aimed, achieved 0 confirmed hits on any American or allied military target. 0. Now here's where it gets even more complicated for Iran. While their foreign minister was busy calling up Turkey and Saudi Arabia, trying to convince them that Iran had every right to retaliate, the very countries Iran had just fired missiles at, Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain, were publicly condemning the attacks. Think about that for a moment. Iran is trying to build diplomatic support by arguing they have a right to self-defense and retaliation. But the countries they just attacked are standing up and saying, no, what you did was wrong. Iran is essentially asking for sympathy from allies, while the victims of their own attack are publicly speaking out against them. This is what happens when military action and diplomatic strategy completely fall apart at the same time. Now let's slow down and really look at what America chose to hit, and just as importantly, what they chose not to hit. If you look at the locations that were struck, they all share something in common. They're not random military bases, they're specific pieces of Iran's surveillance and air defense puzzle. One major site near a key port handles missile defense systems and serves as a ground control hub. Another location on an island has been a recurring target throughout this entire conflict because of its radar capabilities and naval presence. A third site along the coast houses communication towers and storage for military equipment. And a fourth target appears to be a location that was hit before, but had been partially rebuilt during a previous pause in fighting. That last point is incredibly important, and we'll come back to it. But first, let's talk about what wasn't touched. Power plants are still standing, bridges are still intact. The basic infrastructure that keeps everyday life running in Iran, electricity, transportation, water systems, none of that was hit. This is not an accident. This is not because America couldn't hit those targets. We've seen throughout this entire conflict that when American forces want to be precise, they are incredibly precise. There have been operations where oil terminals were specifically left alone, while military targets right next to them were destroyed. So, what does it mean when you take out someone's entire surveillance network but leave their power grid completely untouched? It's a message, and it's one of the clearest messages you can send in modern warfare. The message is this: we know where everything is. We have the capability to hit it. We are choosing, for now, not to. It's like a warning shot, except instead of firing into the air, you're disabling someone's security system while leaving a note that says, "We could have done a lot more. This time we didn't." For Iran's leadership, this should be terrifying, because it means the line between where things are now and where things could go is not a matter of capability. It's a matter of decision, and decisions can change in an instant. All right, before we keep going, let's pause for a quick second. If this kind of breakdown is helping you actually understand what's happening in the world right now, instead of just seeing scary headlines without context, do me a favor, tap that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who are confused about what's going on. And if you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss the next update, because this situation is changing fast. Now, let's get back to it, because there's a part of this story that almost nobody is talking about, and it might be the most important part of all. Remember how I mentioned that one of the targets hit this time had actually been hit before? During a previous ceasefire, there was a pause in fighting. Ceasefires are supposed to be a step toward peace. They're supposed to give both sides time to step back, cool down, and start working toward a real resolution. But what actually happened during that pause? Iran used the time to rebuild. Specifically, they used it to repair and restore parts of their radar and surveillance network that had been damaged in earlier strikes. Sites that were knocked out were brought back online. Capabilities that had been destroyed were partially restored. So when American forces went back and hit some of these same locations again this time, it wasn't because the first strikes failed. It's because the ceasefire gave Iran a window to rebuild what was destroyed, and that window needed to be closed again. This raises a massive question for any future ceasefire discussions. If a pause in fighting just becomes an opportunity for one side to quietly rebuild their military capabilities, then what's the point of the ceasefire in the first place? Going forward, any real ceasefire is going to need some kind of verification system, some way to make sure that during a pause, neither side is using that time to secretly restore the very capabilities that were supposed to be eliminated. Without that kind of oversight, you end up in an endless cycle. Strike, ceasefire, rebuild, strike again, ceasefire, rebuild again. Nothing actually changes. The same targets just keep getting hit over and over. Now let's talk about something that happened completely outside the Middle East, but on the exact same night, because it shows you just how connected everything in the world really is right now. Over in Europe, a French fighter jet operating under NATO command shot down an unidentified drone that had crossed into the airspace of a country that borders Russia. This was the first time NATO forces have fired a live missile over alliance territory in this current period of tension. At the very same time, Russia was running military exercises in the Baltic region, sending bombers and fighter jets into the air as part of what they called routine exercises. Coincidence? Maybe. But in international relations, timing matters. When multiple major powers are running military exercises, intercepting drones, and engaging in shows of force all within the same 24-hour window, across completely different regions of the world, it tells you something about the overall global temperature right now. Tensions aren't just high in one place, they're high almost everywhere at once. And here's something else worth mentioning. There are reports that the American military is considering a major restructuring of how its global commands are organized. Right now, different regions of the world are overseen by different military commands. There's a reported plan to consolidate several of these commands into fewer, larger structures. If this happens, it would mean that the command currently overseeing operations in the Middle East could become part of a much larger organization with responsibilities spanning multiple regions and conflicts at once. Now, whether that's a good idea or a bad idea depends a lot on how it's actually implemented. But here's the obvious concern. You don't usually want to reorganize your entire command structure in the middle of an active conflict. That's like changing your entire management team in the middle of a major project. Even if the new structure ends up being better in the long run, the transition itself takes time, energy, and focus, all of which are currently being used to manage an extremely intense situation in the Gulf. So let's bring all of these pieces together, because individually, each one is significant, but together they paint a much bigger picture. Iran's weapons hit an American helicopter, putting American lives at risk. America's response wasn't to escalate wildly, but to surgically remove Iran's ability to see and coordinate in one of the most critical waterways in the world. Iran tried to retaliate against 3 different countries and failed completely, hitting nothing. Those same 3 countries then publicly condemned Iran for the attack. Iran's foreign minister is now trying to rally diplomatic support from countries that are simultaneously condemning Iran's actions. And the American president has publicly stated, in blunt terms, that Iran's military is in shambles, that their Navy and Air Force are essentially gone, and that Iran has run out of time. That last part is the key. When a country's leader says publicly that the other side has taken too long and will now have to pay the price, that's not just tough talk for the cameras. That's a signal. It's telling everyone watching, Iran, neighboring countries, allies, rivals, that whatever has happened so far is just the first step, not the final one. So where does this leave us? There are really 2 ways to look at what comes next. One possibility is that this moment, the radar network going dark, the failed retaliation, the public condemnation from neighboring countries all happening at once, creates enough pressure that Iran's leadership finally shifts its approach. Sometimes it takes a moment of genuine embarrassment, a moment where the gap between what you claimed and what actually happened becomes impossible to ignore for real change to happen. In this scenario, ongoing diplomatic efforts involving other Gulf nations could become the path toward an actual resolution, one where Iran's leadership can step back from the brink without it looking like total surrender. The other possibility is more troubling. It's that Iran's leadership doesn't actually change course based on military failures, because admitting failure isn't something their system is built to do. In this scenario, the thing that actually changes the equation isn't embarrassment. It's the targeting list that hasn't been used yet. The power plants, the bridges, the infrastructure that keeps daily life functioning. If that list ever gets activated, everything changes. But here's what's important. Both of these scenarios point to the exact same conclusion. The power plants and bridges still standing aren't just buildings and roads. They're a deadline. They're the clock that started ticking the moment the American president said Iran has run out of time. Right now, Iran's radar network is dark. Their retaliation completely failed. The countries around them are united in condemning their actions. And the targets that would make the difference between a country that can function normally and a country that suddenly can't, those targets are still standing. For now. The decision of whether they stay standing isn't a question of military capability anymore. We've just watched American forces demonstrate with absolute precision that they can hit exactly what they want to hit, exactly when they want to hit it. The only question left is whether that decision gets made. And if history has taught us anything about moments like this, it's that the side holding back rarely waits forever. If you found this breakdown valuable, do one thing for me before you go. Share this video with someone who's been confused about what's actually happening in the Middle East right now. Headlines move fast, but understanding takes time, and that's exactly what we're here for. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next 24 hours could completely change this story, and you'll want to be here when it does.